At my brother's wedding reception, my sick 8-year-old son lost his balance, bumped into the expensive wedding cake, and it fell to the floor and broke apart. My brother exploded in rage, but my own mother went even further. She grabbed my helpless boy by the throat and smashed his head into a wall to save face in front of the new in-laws. They thought they could sacrifice my son to protect their reputation, but they had no idea what that brutal moment was about to unleash. Before I tell you my son's heartbreaking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. What country and city are you in, and what time is it there right now? Leave a comment below. It always makes me happy to see how far my voice has reached around the world. Hello, my name is Melissa, and for 33 years, I was the invisible variable in the Sterling family equation. Growing up in the historic old money pockets of Boston, Massachusetts, I was conditioned to believe that family loyalty wasn't just a virtue, it was an absolute law. My father, Richard, used to tell me that the family name was a shield, and that we all had to bleed a little to keep it polished. But as I grew older, I realized I was the only one doing the bleeding. I was the eldest, the hardworking daughter who pulled straight A's at Boston College, climbing the corporate ladder in healthcare administration, while my younger brother Brandon was treated like a genetic masterpiece who could do no wrong. I swallowed the neglect, convincing myself that if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, and gave more, they would finally see me. But my entire perspective on life shifted 8 years ago when my son Patrick was born. Patrick came into this world fighting. He was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a severe medical condition where an abnormal buildup of cerebrospinal fluid, widening the ventricles, puts intense, relentless pressure on the brain. To save his life, neurosurgeons had to implant a synthetic shunt inside his brain when he was just 3 weeks old to drain the fluid down into his abdomen. Because of his condition, Patrick's head was noticeably larger than other children his age. His physical balance was deeply compromised. His little legs often trembled under his own weight, and his hands possessed a permanent, subtle shake that made simple tasks like holding a fork an uphill battle. Yet, looking past the medical charts and the visible toll of his illness, Patrick was a beacon of pure, unfiltered innocence. He didn't know how to hate. He didn't understand why his grandparents looked past him during the holidays, or why his Uncle Brandon wouldn't even look him in the eye. When Patrick smiled, his whole face lit up, and he would wrap his small, fragile arms around my neck, whispering that I was his best friend. My husband David, a steady, fiercely protective high school history teacher, and I built our entire universe around keeping Patrick safe. We knew his skull was fragile. We knew a sudden fall, a harsh blow, or a malfunctioning shunt could cause irreversible neurological damage, or worse. David and I worked opposing shifts, budgeted every single dollar down to the cent, and poured our souls into Patrick's physical therapy. I had long given up on receiving any love from my biological parents. But I foolishly believed that underneath their cold, aristocratic exterior, they possessed enough basic human decency to leave my innocent child alone. I was completely wrong. To understand the monster my mother became in that ballroom, you have to understand exactly what I sacrificed for this family, and how my father and brother stripped me of my dignity years before. 9 years ago, I was a 24-year-old woman working 60 hours a week, surviving on black coffee and sheer willpower. I had saved up every single penny to buy my absolute dream car, a brand new charcoal gray BMW 3 Series. It was the first tangible proof that I could succeed without my father's approval or my mother's backhanded compliments. I kept it pristine. It was my pride and joy. A year later, I was 7 months pregnant with Patrick. My feet were swollen, my back ached constantly, and the summer heat in Boston was suffocating. One Sunday afternoon, I drove over to my parents' brick colonial home in Beacon Hill for a mandatory family dinner. I walked through the front door, exhausted, and placed my car keys on the antique console table in the foyer. I didn't think twice about it. But when dinner ended and I prepared to leave, my keys were gone. I searched the counters, flipped the couch cushions, and checked my purse. That was when my father, Richard, walked into the living room, swirling a glass of scotch. He looked at me with a cold, dismissive smirk and said, "Stop pacing, Melissa. I gave the keys to Brandon. He's starting his senior year at Northeastern, and a Sterling man cannot be seen taking the subway. It ruins our image." I froze, thinking it was a sick joke. "You did what?" "Dad, that's my car. I paid for it. I registered it. I need it to get to the hospital for my prenatal checkups." Brandon stepped out from the kitchen, twirling my key fob around his finger with a smug, arrogant grin. "Come on, Mel," he chuckled. "You're just going to be a stay-at-home mom anyway. You don't need a sports sedan. Besides, Dad promised me a premium ride if I kept my GPA above a 3.0. Tears streamed down my face. I turned to my mother, Eleanor, expecting her to defend me. Instead, She didn't even look up from her iPad. "Don't be so dramatic, Melissa," she sighed. "Your brother needs to network with the right crowd. You can always buy a used minivan." Furious, I marched toward Brandon and reached for my keys. "Give them back right now, Brandon, or I'm calling the police." Before my hand could even touch the keys, my father's hand flew across the room. The impact was a brutal, blinding flash. His palm slammed into my cheek so hard that I stumbled backward, my pregnant belly hitting the edge of the dining table. I cried out, clutching my stomach in sheer panic. "You will not disrespect your brother, and you will not threaten this family with the police," Richard roared, towering over me, his face red with rage. "A good sister sacrifices for her brother's future. You will hand over the title tomorrow, or you are dead to us." I stood there, heavily pregnant, my face burning from my own father's strike, watching my brother slide into the driver's seat of my hard-earned car and speed away. David was furious when I told him, but I begged him not to escalate it. I was terrified the stress would harm the baby. We moved into a modest apartment, cut all financial ties, and I signed over the title just to buy my peace. Meanwhile, my parents spent the next several years draining what was left of their own credit and secretly liquidating my grandfather's trust fund, money that was supposed to be my inheritance, just to keep Brandon afloat in high society. They needed him to look like a millionaire because they had targeted their ultimate prize, Vanessa Vance, the daughter of a billionaire real estate tycoon. And they were willing to crush anyone who got in the way of that illusion. By the time Brandon proposed to Vanessa Vance, my biological family had successfully built a fortress of lies. To the Vance family, the Sterlings were an elite old money dynasty whose wealth was as solid as the brick foundations of Beacon Hill. In reality, they were a house of cards, living on maxed-out lines of credit, forged financial statements, and the stolen remains of my grandfather's estate. Eleanor spent an entire year engineering the wedding of the century at the historic Grandview Ballroom in downtown Boston. It was an exercise in pure, unadulterated vanity. Every single detail, from the imported white orchids to the five-piece string quartet, was chosen to project an image of effortless opulence. They needed this marriage to go through. Vanessa's billionaire father, Arthur Vance, was planning to bring Richard and Brandon into his global real estate firm, a move that would permanently bail my parents out of their hidden, crushing debt. David and I wanted absolutely nothing to do with this circus. For 8 years, we had lived in a completely different reality, one measured in speech therapy milestones, neurology appointments, and the quiet joy of watching our son Patrick learn to navigate a world that felt too heavy for his fragile frame. But 2 weeks before the wedding, Eleanor showed up at our modest apartment unannounced. She didn't come out of love. She came with a calculated agenda. "The Vances pride themselves on their philanthropy and family values," Eleanor said, her eyes scanning our small living room with visible disgust. "They know you have a child, Melissa. If you don't bring Patrick to the reception, it will look like we are hiding something. It will look like we lack transparency. You will bring him, dress him in a tailored suit, and keep him seated during the cocktail hour so Vanessa's mother can see what a charitable, supportive family we are." "Patrick is not a prop for your social climbing, Mom," I snapped, my grip tightening around my coffee mug. "His balance has been terrible this week. The noise, the flashing lights, the crowded rooms, it completely disorients him. It's dangerous for his condition." Eleanor scoffed, waving her manicured hand in dismissal. "He just needs to sit still for an hour, Melissa. Don't ruin this for your brother. Brandon's entire future depends on the Vances seeing a perfect, united family. Richard and I have invested too much into this day to let your overprotective paranoia get in the way." Against my better judgment, and after endless pestering from my father, I finally relented. I agreed to bring Patrick to the reception for just 1 hour, under the strict condition that David and I would keep him far away from the chaotic main floor. David was deeply uneasy about it, but he agreed to stay close by my side. On the day of the wedding, as I pulled a tiny navy blue tuxedo over Patrick's fragile shoulders and adjusted his clip-on tie, he looked up at me with his large, innocent eyes and whispered, "Do I look handsome like Daddy, Mom?" My heart swallowed a lump of pure guilt. I had no idea that by bringing my sweet boy into that den of wolves, I was marching him directly into a nightmare. The Grandview Ballroom was suffocating. Chandeliers cast a blinding, heavy glow over 400 guests draped in diamonds and designer tuxedos, their laughter clinking against crystal glasses. David and I immediately found a quiet corner near the heavy velvet drapes on the perimeter, keeping Patrick between us. The noise was already overwhelming for him. His small hand gripped mine with a trembling intensity, and his large, heavy head tilted slightly as he struggled to process the sensory overload.